So welcome everybody. Let's start with cultivating our motivation. And think for a minute what it would be like to be born in a different realm. So that you aren't you, but maybe you're an animal or a being in some very painful place with a lot of superstition and suspicion and fear. Or maybe somebody overwhelmed by craving, running around, trying to get what you want and never getting it. A mind that's totally obsessed and fearful. So there are these realms of rebirth that we have been born into in the past due to our own actions. And we may have seeds in our mind stream for those same kind of rebirths now, in which case, if we do nothing, it's only a matter of time before those seeds ripen and we find ourselves in those quite dreadful states. So now while we have the chance, while we're temporarily human beings with human intelligence, let's use this opportunity, because we don't know how long we'll have it. And it's not easy to get again in the future. And so let's really dedicate ourselves to practicing the path for the benefit of all beings. And that means to develop our own potential completely, so that we have the skill and wisdom and compassion necessary to benefit ourselves and others in the highest way. And so let's make that not only the purpose of our life in general, but the purpose of sharing the evening together tonight. So cultivate that motivation. So when we spend some time thinking about the other realms and the possibility of rebirth there, we begin to see our own life in a very different way. Instead of it seeming so real, so solid, this is reality for sure, the only reality there ever is. We begin to feel that this life is just like a little sliver, you know, a little sliver of awareness that we accidentally, almost accidentally came across in this whole ocean of cyclic existence. And so then, instead of taking our life for granted, we really see it and every single moment in time as something very precious, something not to be wasted. You know, it's like if you have something very rare and very precious, you know, you don't just kind of neglect it, do you? So in the same way, you know, really seeing this little bit of awareness that we have now by having a human mind and living in an environment where we can meet the teachings and practice them and have all our senses about us and have, you know, enough food to eat and all those conditions, meeting teachers, meeting Dharma friends, living in a place where the Buddha's taught, all those conditions that are needed, and having them now, and it's so difficult for them all to come together at once. Yeah? And so, it changes our perspective of what time is about and what this life is about. Because so often we have a certain view of our life, don't we? And it just feels like, well, this is my life. Of course I wake up in the morning, and this is who I am, and this is what I do, and it's always going to go on like this. Okay, maybe I get a little bit older, but, I'm going to live forever. And even if I die, well, I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to think in the same way, and talk in the same way, and do the same things, and because I have control of everything. Ha, 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 ha. This is kind of the ignorant mind that has this kind of perception, not understanding, the mind stream as a continuity that's influenced by karma, by all sorts of other factors, and that we aren't some concrete person who's always been, who we are now with the personality we have now, knowing the people and having the job we have now and all of that kind of stuff. This is just a little temporary blip, on the radar of all of samsara. Yeah, it seems almost astounding that we even got this life, doesn't it? It's like, how did this happen? Yeah, so we really have to appreciate it and, as best as we can to take advantage of it with a feeling of great joy, They say like a beggar who found a jewel in the rubbish. Maybe a modern example, a beggar who finds a credit card with his own name, but it's attached to, but it's not his, it belongs to somebody else's account. He can get anything he wants. Except they say this life is even worth more than that, because even if you have unlimited credit, all you can get is basically junk. Can't you? Basically a lot of junk. But you can't get enlightenment with a credit card. And our credit card is, in America, what we cherish the most. My ticket to happiness is this little piece of plastic. That's how we delude ourselves in many ways. Yeah. Okay. So really feeling our life as something precious and special, and not wanting to waste it with stupid agios. One word in Italian I remembered. Okay, so we're doing the mind training like rays of the sun, and Nam Kapel is telling us how to make our lives meaningful, and especially how to practice thought training in our daily lives. And that's what's so special about this particular teaching, is that it's really geared for our daily life and how to transform this daily life. Because anyway, we have this body, we have this mind, we wake up in the morning. How do we make our entire life something that corresponds to the path to enlightenment? So lots of practical advice in this teaching. So we're on this section, the section where we're talking about the commitments of mind training. Okay? We were talking about the maxims of mind training. So we talked about avoiding poisonous food, meaning ignorance, anger, and attachment. Don't maintain inverted loyalty, by, holding a grudge and not letting it go. We'll talk some more about that today. Not making malicious banter, slandering other people and creating disharmony. And then the next one says, don't wait in ambush. Okay, you got an image of somebody waiting in ambush? So the explanation says, this refers to nursing a grudge against someone for some slight and retaliating when you are in a position to do so. Once you have entered into this practice of mind training, you cannot behave in such a fashion, since to do so would completely contradict the practice of taking others' troubles and sufferings upon yourself. Okay? So this line is telling us to let go of the mind that seeks revenge, that sits in wait for the perfect time to retaliate. That rhymes, doesn't it? But that's what we do. We sit and wait for the perfect time to retaliate. We are so patient. We don't hurry things. We don't rush. We plan it meticulously, every little detail. And we wait for the right time. Then, whammo, we give other people our terrorist attack. Don't we? Yeah. So, it's amazing how sometimes people can do even some small thing to us, but we just hold on to it and remember it for such a long time. Like I told you that when I did my first Bodhisattva retreat, I remembered that I was still mad at my second grade teacher for not letting me be in the class play. Still mad. So these kinds of things that we often hold from years and years and years ago, small things people did, or even big things people did. Of course, anything that concerns us is huge to our own mind. So we don't have any small slights. We only have big slights. Don't we? Yeah. And we hold on to it and then, really nurse that grudge and think how I'm going to get even and how I'm going to make that person miserable. And then, of course, they'll come to their senses and they'll realize how much what they did hurt me. And then they'll come and apologize to me. That's what our mind says, doesn't it? How likely is that? That we're going to hurt somebody and they're going to apologize to us? Yeah. It doesn't work that way, does it? We would like it to work that way. Yeah. I'll get even and then they'll reflect and they'll realize they've hurt me. And then, there might be people who hurt us with the same kind of a way of thinking. And after somebody hurts us, do we ever reflect on the bad things we did to that person and go and apologize to them? Hardly. Hardly. Yeah, so thinking that somebody else is going to do it when we take our revenge really doesn't make much sense. So this kind of way of thinking is completely the opposite of the thought training practice. Because in the mind training, the thought training practice, we want to take on others' suffering, not give them suffering. Okay? When we hold a grudge, we want to give suffering. It's completely opposite from the bodhicitta mind. So it's something really, to look at now in retreat. Where are those sticky points in our mind where we, have some jealousy or resentment or spite, wanting to get even. And, where do we secret that out in our mind? But how are we ever going to develop bodhicitta when that kind of thought is lying in wait, ready to make the ambush? We're not harming others by holding a grudge, are we? We're interfering with our own path. We're interfering with our own path to enlightenment by holding a grudge. Yeah, so we're making ourselves suffer, not making the other person suffer. Yeah, so we suffer in terms of our own spiritual practice, but also psychologically we suffer when we hold a grudge. Yeah? And so I think this is one of the things that's very, very important to look at in our life, because we may be holding on to things that we don't even know we've been holding on to because we've had them for so long. Yeah? But they really interfere with our practice. So it's good to try and acknowledge those things and then release them and forgive the person for whatever they did. Because, in harming us in the past, they created negative karma that they have to experience the result of. And also, if they had a harmful motivation towards us, it comes from their own suffering. Sometimes they did something that hurt us, but they didn't do it with a conscious wish to hurt us. They just did it because they were reckless or careless or mindless or, not thinking at all. And we've certainly acted that way, haven't we? So, to offer some forgiveness, some understanding to people who have done that where we have ended up suffering. So if we can offer that forgiveness and let go of it, then our own heart is peaceful. Yeah, and then as we grow old, we can be kind of happy and joyful. But, you can really see sometimes the difference between young people and older people. And you can see, not just in terms of maturity, but sometimes with the older people, they've just been accumulating all this hurt and pain, each year, one by one, holding on to that, becoming more bitter, or wanting revenge, or hating themselves, or whatever it is. And we can see, how some people, as they age, get really, really stuck through this process of holding on to the pains that they've received, instead of being able to release them. So if you think of friends and relatives that who, as they age are like that, then ask yourself, do I want to become like them? Is this the role model for my own life? That I want to become like this aunt and uncle or whoever it is who is bitter and wants revenge and feels slighted and so on. I think it's a good thing, and then it's easy to see, hey, no, I don't want to be like that. Well, then what do I have to do to avoid becoming like that? And I think here's where that process of forgiveness is so important. Because forgiveness just means putting it down. And letting go of the thought that what happens to me is the most important thing in the world. Okay, so don't wait in ambush. The next line says, don't strike at the vital point. Okay? So this is to reveal others' mistake out of spite. You should never do this to humans or non-human beings. because it can provoke such severe anxiety as to cause death. Okay, so another way of translating this line is never strike at the heart. Okay, don't strike at the vital point, never strike at the heart. What it means is don't hit someone's sensitive points. Yeah, so we often know what someone's sensitive points are, you know, what is extremely painful for them in their life, and then we tease them or ridicule them or bring up the situation or, you know, make a reference to it that is ever so slight that only that person catches it. Or maybe we just plain old bluntly, you know, use our speech to stick a dagger in somebody's heart, you know, to really hit them where they're very vulnerable, where they're very easily hurt over some sensitive point. And so this is something that it's easy to do with the people that we are close to, because we know their sensitive points. People we aren't so close to, it's a little bit hit and miss. We don't always know what they're sensitive about. I mean, we might know some general things that most people are sensitive about, but you know, having the specialist knowledge of somebody's, you know, personal vulnerabilities or soft spots, that comes when we know somebody well, you know, and when, especially if somebody has opened up to us and entrusted us, you know, with things that are difficult to say or things that they don't tell everybody else. And then, you know, because maybe we feel hurt, then we turn around and we say something or do something that we know is going to hurt them very, very severely. Okay, this happens in divorce a lot, doesn't it? Yeah? Somebody you were very loving towards, that you were very attached to, who trusted and told you their secrets, and then, you know, they make you mad, or they, you know, do something you don't like, or your mind changes, or who knows what happens, the karma changes, and then, you know, oh, I know that person real well, and they're sensitive about X, Y, Z. Now, I'm going to get them. Yeah, or revealing, there was just some story in the paper about some big Wall Street guy who got a divorce years ago, but now his wife is saying that, you know, he was doing all sorts of insider trading and illegal things, you know, so from her hurt feelings, then saying something that, you know, is going to hurt him. So this thing, you know, really hitting people where they're quite sensitive. So really taking care with that, you know, taking very good care, because again, especially, this is something that's completely counter to the practice of developing bodhicitta. Yeah, because in bodhicitta we're wishing sentient beings happiness and freedom from suffering. And so, you know, knowing their vulnerabilities and then making sure we hit that point is not very becoming for somebody who says that they want to work for the benefit of others. Yeah, so in these kinds of situations, you know, we have to recognize these aspects of ourselves, these sides of ourselves, and be very honest and recognize when it's there. Because if we don't recognize it, then it still controls us from the background. Okay? But if we can recognize it, then we can work with it. And then, you know, when we recognize something ugly in ourselves, then it can be a very good technique to ask ourselves, is this becoming for somebody who says they have the values that I say I have? You know? Am I living according to my own values and principles? Yeah, and so here you have these two mental factors. If you say I'm to yourself, am I living according to my own values and principles? You're invoking your integrity, you know? And if you say, is this suitable behavior for, you know, for somebody who says that they want to benefit others, then we're invoking the mental factor of consideration for others. You know, we're kind of, wow, how would it look to other people if I say, you know, this is what I value, and then I have these kind of attitudes in my mind. You know, it's really not very becoming. So whether it's other human beings or even to the Buddha, you know, yeah. So this way of thinking can actually be quite good for us. Okay, so here, if I can go on a little tangent, there's two kinds of shame. Okay, there's one kind of shame that is an affliction where we just feel like we're worthless, you know, for no particular reason, but we feel we're worthless and we do everything wrong. That's one kind of shame. But there's another kind of shame that I remember my parents saying to me, of, aren't you ashamed of yourself? In other words, you know what to do. They were saying to me, you know what to do. You know the difference between good and bad. And you didn't think, and you deliberately made the wrong decision. And don't you feel kind of ashamed or shy or embarrassed or, you know, something because, you know, what you did hurt somebody else or hurt yourself? So do you see the difference between these two meanings of shame? Yeah. One we want to abandon because it's a defilement. The other one can be kind of useful in our Dharma practice if we say to ourselves, you know, how do I look in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas if I'm saying one thing and doing another? And we say it to ourselves in that tone of voice. We don't say it to ourselves in the tone of voice of, well, how do you look, you idiot, if you say you believe in this and you're doing the opposite, you jerk. Okay? If we talk to ourselves that way, that's a defilement. Okay? But if we just put that question to ourselves in a gentle way, it invokes us to think with wisdom about, well, how am I making my decisions about what to do and what not to do? Are you seeing the difference here? Can you find in your own mind the difference between these? Between tormenting yourself and, you know, and posing a thoughtful question to yourself? Can you see the difference between the shame that thinks you're no good and the shame that feels I am good and I want to act that way instead of, you know, mess up? Okay? So these are really important aspects of our mind that we have to differentiate, not only conceptually, but to be able to identify them in our own experience and not get them confused. Because if we get them confused, we're going to go down the wrong path. Yeah? But if we can find these, it helps us to figure out, you know, what to cultivate and what to abandon. And it helps us think clearer and make wiser decisions. Okay? Any questions about this? Because this is an important point where we sometimes can get kind of confused. Do you have anything? Okay. So anyway, back to the main point. I find it effective in my own mind if I am striking at the heart of somebody else. You know, the thought comes in my mind to do that. Yeah. to ask myself, wait a minute, is this becoming for somebody who says that you have the values you say you have? Yeah? And then it's like, no. Well, drop that thought. Banish that thought. Yeah, that's not a thought I want to act on. That's not a thought I want to become familiar with. Yeah? Okay? So this is very helpful, as you do retreat and different thoughts and emotions come up. My hope is that maybe you'll remember this and can apply it. Okay, then the next advice. Don't place the load of a horse on a pony. Or another translation, do not load an ox with the load of a zoe. Okay. A zoe is a yak, I think a female yak, which is stronger than an ox. In any case, don't place the load of a horse on a pony. Okay? So, our author says, this refers to slyly avoiding a common problem and passing the unwanted burden to others. Okay? So it means giving what in fact is our responsibility to somebody else to fulfill, but that other person isn't capable of doing it. But we may do it either to humiliate them or because we're too lazy to do the job, so we just pass it on to somebody else. Okay? So we, don't pass difficult tasks on to people who don't have the skills or the capabilities of doing them. So, for example, if you're the supervisor in a job, try to give people responsibility that corresponds to their abilities. Okay? And not give them tasks to do that they don't have the skills to do. Or can't learn the skills to do, quickly. Yeah. So sometimes, it's easy. We want to pass off something difficult to somebody else because then we don't have to do it. Yeah. I do this. Too lazy. I usually try and do it with somebody who has the skill because I do want the thing done. I don't really want to humiliate somebody. But sometimes, we don't take care and we dodge our responsibility and give it to somebody else. And then when it isn't done or it's not done properly and somebody asks about it, we point the finger and say, oh, they were supposed to do it, not me. Yeah. I wasn't on the rota. I didn't know I was supposed to. That's not part of my job description. That's his job description, not me. I'm little twinkle toes. They're the one that messed up. Yeah. Did you ever do this to your younger siblings? Yeah? Kind of, oh, their fault. Their fault. They started doing all the naughty things because they're young and immature. And then my parents' answer was, but it's still your fault because you're older and you should have known better, even if they didn't. So I kept trying to put loads of horses on ponies, and my parents kept giving it back to me. But it's good. Okay, so, whenever we're in a job or something, shuffling off our responsibilities and onto somebody else. Okay, then the next one says, don't turn gods into devils. So the explanation. Just as you can lose your life if you make mistakes in the process of cultivating worldly gods, which is known as gods turning into devils. Okay, so this is something in Tibetan culture, you know. There's some of these references I understand, some I don't. This one I understand. If you get involved in, you know, worshiping some kind of worldly deity, yeah, if you do it incorrectly because a worldly deity is worldly and they still have worldly afflictions, then they can turn against you. Okay, so that's what it means, that in a worldly way, to turn a god into a devil is you do something wrong in your relationship and then they turn against you. So that's the analogy. Okay, so once you have entered into the practice of mind training, if any aspect of your listening, contemplation, and meditation provokes your misconception of self and serves to increase it, it is known as turning gods into devils. Please see that this does not happen. Okay? So what this is referring to is our practice of hearing, thinking, and meditating is like a god. But if we misuse that practice so that it increases our sense of self, our self-grasping or our self-centered thought, then we've turned that God of hearing, thinking, and meditating on the Dharma into a devil because it's been increasing our self-centered thought and self-grasping ignorance. Okay? So what this is referring to, we can do this in many ways, you know, and if our self-grasping gets stronger through Dharma practice, then we know something's wrong. So what are some ways we might turn a god into a devil? Well, let's say we hear a teaching, yeah, which is like the god, yeah, something virtuous. And then we get really into it and we learn all the ins and outs and we have a really good intellectual understanding of it. And we get arrogant about that because we have a good intellectual understanding, but all these other people don't. Yeah, so we get arrogant, and then we start thinking, well, I should be a great teacher, and they should come and listen to me because, you know, I understand this so well. So then you see our self-centeredness is getting stronger, our self-conceit, self-grasping is getting stronger. So in the name of the Dharma, we're generating defilements. So that's turning a god into a devil. Okay. Another way we might turn a god into a devil is we hear, you know, like how we should practice these excellent practices of bodhisattvas, and then we say, I am totally incapable. I am such an idiot. There's no way I can do this practice. Every time I try to do it, I botch it up. I am just scum. Okay? That is also turning a god into a devil, because berating ourselves like that is increasing our self-centeredness and our self-grasping. Isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah? Berating ourselves is increasing our self-centeredness and our self-grasping. Okay? So we shouldn't use the Dharma to berate ourselves, because that's turning a god into a devil in our own mind. So now, hearing this, don't tell yourself that you're an idiot for criticizing yourself using the Dharma to criticize yourself. And don't tell yourself you're an idiot for thinking you're an idiot for criticizing yourself. Oh, you get what I mean? Okay. So this is something, you know, to remember, because sometimes we have these old mental habits that we just slip into. They're so natural, we just slip into them. And we think that it's practicing the Dharma. And it's not. It's increasing self-grasping, either by puffing ourselves up with arrogance, or putting ourselves down. Okay, both of those extremes are turning a god into a devil, if we use the Dharma to do that to ourselves. Okay, so be on the lookout for that. Yeah, because it's one way that you can get really tangled up without realizing you're getting tangled up. Okay. Wait a minute. Oh, okay. Then the next one says, don't seek others' misery as a means to happiness. So all these are kind of coming to very similar points, aren't they? Okay, do not inflict misery for the possession of happiness. Okay, so what it means, it says this refers to waiting to capitalize on others' misfortune. You should train yourself never to act in such a way. Okay, so it means don't harm others to get what we want. Don't seek others' misery as a means to happiness. So you see, there's a lot of common theme in many of these here, in harming somebody else, thinking that that will bring us happiness. For example, when we retaliate, against something, or as it says here, to wait to capitalize on somebody's misfortune. So we wait until somebody is fired, and then we do something really nasty. Okay? Or, we just derive some pleasure from seeing others squirm and wiggle and be embarrassed, or whatever. And sometimes we treat children like this. We might tease a child, oh, there's a boogeyman, they're going to come get you. And somehow watching the kid feel so scared, the adults chuckle, ha 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 ha, I'm so powerful, I can make that kid squirm. Or, or you threaten a kid, you don't really mean it, but you threaten them, and they become quite afraid, Or people even do that to animals. They pick up something like they're going to strike an animal and make the animal afraid. So, capitalizing on others' weakness or inflicting harm on others, thinking that that shows how powerful we are and how in control we are, that we can make others cower. Yeah? So this happens, I would imagine, this I know is a common happening in prison, where people just try and dominate one another. I don't know in the gym if it happens too, in the sports club, with the various athletes, if they do that thing to each other, or what kind of groups of people where people try and, in some ways rub it in that somebody made a mistake, or notch themselves up because somebody else has had some misfortune. Or even like, your competitor at work or your colleague at work gets sick, and then you just kind of nose your way in to get their position. So it doesn't even have to be a blatant way of inflicting harm, but it can be one of these other ways where we just kind of come in through the back door because somebody else is suffering. Yeah. Somebody else is in a relationship, they're having a little bit of trouble, so we just kind of go in pretending we have a kind heart to listen to them, and then we run off with them or something. All these kinds of things where we can really act from quite a self-centered perspective. And so, being careful with that. Yeah, so all these things, they all many of them, these advices for this evening all have to do with inflicting pain on others, don't they? You know, and how that's completely the opposite from how we want to train our mind as people who, you know, think of the value of the Bodhisattva way of life. Yeah, we actually want to train our mind in quite the opposite way. So he says, these are the commitments that a practitioner of mind training should never transgress. Now there's a couple of other commitments that are from the 7-point training of mind, because remember there's many mind training texts. So some of these are the same as in the 7-point thought transformation. There's a couple of them that are in the 7 points, you know, when they talk about the commitments of thought training that aren't in this text, and I thought I would just mention them. So one says, do not serve the let me do this one first. Purify first whichever affliction is heaviest. So I think this is quite good advice. Whatever affliction is the heaviest, whichever affliction really makes the most obvious mess in our life, work on that one. Okay? And so this is very wise advice because, you know, whatever your biggest problem is, try and solve that one. Because sometimes, you know, when we come to the Dharma, when we hear the 8 worldly concerns, for example, we see, boy, you know, I have all these 8 worldly concerns. And I'm attached to, you know, I'm attached to grapefruit. And, you know, and I'm attached to, you know, having blue sneakers. And you know, we see all these attachments that we have. And then we say, okay, I really have to overcome my attachment to grapefruit, you know, and we work and we do all these things to overcome our attachment to grapefruit or our attachment to blue sneakers, you know, or we get really irritated when somebody puts the stamp upside down on the envelope. So we work so hard to conquer our irritation and annoyance of people putting stamps upside down on an envelope. You know, we do this kind of thing, don't we? You know, we see like, oh boy, I have so many faults. Well, here's an obvious one. Let's work on it. But are these really the biggest afflictions that we have and our biggest problems, you know? May those be our biggest afflictions. Yeah? So instead of getting all hung up on the small attachments and tormenting ourselves about them, look at the big attachments that really make you confused. Look at the big angers where you really, you know, lose it and create a lot of negative karma. So look at the big things, yeah, and work with those. And don't, you know, torment yourself over the little ones. After you get the big ones, you know, somewhat under control, then you can go to the smaller ones. Okay? I remember once at one of our monastic conferences, I can't remember the situation exactly, but one monk was giving a talk, and he had lived in Thailand when he first ordained, and you know the people who were offering him food, and he loved mangoes, you know. So every lunch was like this big battle for him about his attachment to mangoes, because he, you know, wanted to take more mangoes than anybody else at the lunch table and stuff like that. So he was telling us about that, because I think we must have been talking about our early days of training, something like that. And then I spoke after him. And I told the story of working with Sam, you know, and this guy who's just coming in and telling me everything I do is wrong, and you know, I was, you know, spiritual director, and preparing, you know, different texts, and he'd come in and take them, you know, because he didn't like what I was doing, and you know, all this kind of stuff, and how completely furious I got. And I said, that's what I was working with. I wish all I had to work with as a new nun was my attachment to mangoes. That would have been so nice. But, you know, I was working with, you know, getting shot down, because sometimes they would all gang up on me in a meeting, you know, and they loved, you know, if you were sensitive, to make fun of you. So, you know, so I was dealing with all of this, which of course was of incredible earth-shattering importance, because it all concerned me. Definitely more important than mangoes. But, but you know, it was just interesting to see the difference in our different challenges that we had to face. But, you know, my point is, you know, whatever is really messing up your life the biggest way, whether it's mangoes or Sam, work on that, okay? And then that way, you know, you'll really begin to make some progress on things. Okay? So here is, if it's where it says purify first whichever affliction is heaviest, you know, then you really want to know all the antidotes to the various afflictions and make sure you apply the right antidote to each affliction. Okay? So for attachment, you contemplate impermanence and death, or the defects of cyclic existence. For anger, you contemplate fortitude, you contemplate love and compassion. Yeah. For skeptical doubt, you calm your mind with the breathing meditation. For reasonable doubt, you ask questions and do investigation. Yeah. For jealousy, you practice rejoicing. For falling asleep, you do lots of prostrations to wake yourself up. Okay, so knowing what the various antidotes are, and then remembering to apply them. So that's purify first whichever affliction is heaviest. Then another one is do not serve the central object leniently. Okay, so the central object here refers to our afflictions. So don't serve them leniently. Don't coddle our afflictions. Yeah? Don't indulge in our inflictions. Don't make excuses for them. Okay? Oh, poor me. I've done such good Dharma practice. I've worked so hard. Now, let's indulge. Okay? Yeah, so let's not self-sabotage in that kind of way. It doesn't mean that we have to live our life with, you know, in, what do you call them, strictures? Or, you know, where we squeeze, you have some kind of brace on that squeezes you? Yeah, like a tight jacket or something like that. Yeah, but rather, you know, let's not make up excuses for our afflictions and indulge in them. Yeah. Oh, I've worked so hard to practice Dharma. Now I deserve to make this nasty remark to somebody or something. You know, that's completely, again, ridiculous. Okay, so we should see the disadvantages of our afflictions, you know, be aware of their disadvantages and then not go along with them. And then another one that was not mentioned in this text says, do not be treacherous. So don't deceive others, making them think that leading them to think we're doing one thing while we're actually doing another one. Okay? For example, being nice to people when we're actually trying to get something out of them. Okay? Or using people with the pretense of benefiting them. Okay, so being treacherous in this way, having one motivation, but presenting our motivation differently to somebody else. Okay, so that they'll go along with it, so that somehow it serves the purpose of our own self-centered mind. And I think here, really using other people to get something from them, that's kind of one of the most disgusting ways that this treachery comes out. Don't you think? Yeah? Do you ever use people to get something out of them? Pretend to, be nice to somebody so that they'll do something good for you afterwards, or make connections for you, or give you something, or say something nice about you to some people, or, all kinds of dishonest, hypocritical ways, yeah? So again, yeah, when it says don't be treacherous, it's advising us, they're advising us not to be like this for our own safety and our own happiness, because when we really value bodhicitta, when we really want to attain enlightenment for the benefit of others, if we let this dishonest mind come up and run the show and let us, use it to manipulate people or use people, yeah, then it's really not corresponding with where we want to get in our spiritual practice. Yeah. So instead of saying to ourselves, I'm so bad because I do this, to say, it goes the opposite direction of my spiritual practice. I don't want to do that. And it's not becoming for somebody who is on a spiritual path. I need to kind of shape up. And so that kind of way of talking to ourselves in a gentle way, but a firm way, I really need to shape up here. This really is not acceptable. Yeah. Then that can, make us more aware and make us more honest in our relationships with other people. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes before the end of the session if you have questions.
There's part of my mind that just doesn't want to look at this. And how the self-centered thought can so easily disguise the motivation. So on the surface it looks really quite virtuous and very philanthropic, but I can see my mind just kind of cringing a little bit because it needs to look at some things.
Yeah.
Because in our life here we have some people who are so generous to us, and that it's so easy to just see that as something to take advantage of. That they just want so much to help, they want so much to give and support and house and transport and stuff. Is that after a while, I have to watch my mind to not get the sense of entitlement that it's something that I should expect. Because it comes so freely and so generously.
Yeah.
So sometimes my mind gets really kind of, let's see, what is the word I want to use? It's almost proud about it. I think more probably entitled, but not in a real conscious way. Because I really like the energy that comes from the kindness. It really makes me, well, on two ways. It either makes me feel, when I'm in my self-centered thought, that, I kind of deserve this. And the other one is that it humbles me because I say, and are you keeping up your end of the promise of what you have said that you will do? But my vacillate, my mind doesn't stay steady on virtue when it comes to this.
Yeah. So you're saying how some of these teachings tonight, there's a certain aspect of the mind that is resistant to hearing them. Anybody else feeling that? Like, gee, can't we talk about something else? Some kind of resistance to the kind of honesty that this teaching is asking us to have. And so she was giving the example in herself of accepting the incredible generosity that people show us with a feeling of entitlement. you know, well, I must be almost royalty, you know? And when actually the way to accept that kind of generosity is, as you said, am I holding up my end of the bargain? Am I fulfilling my commitments to do that? And so in a similar way, kind of nudging ourselves along, saying, you know, people are being so kind to us, I've got to really work harder, you know, at my practice. Mm-hmm.
What I noticed was same phenomena, but of course different words.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that was said by non-Kapel, my first reaction was, oh, I don't do that. Oh, I don't do that. I mean, it's just so automatic. I was sitting there watching that. Go, oh, I don't do that. And so then I started, as you were talking, thinking, well, find an example where you have done it. And then I started getting horrified. You know, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Kind of reminded me of the soccer practice. You just start getting him back to the closet.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, yeah. So saying as you listen to this teaching, you just kind of say, oh, I don't do that one, I don't do that one. He's talking to somebody else. He's talking to somebody else, but I don't do that. And then stopping and just saying, well, when may I have done it in the past, you know, and then seeing some episodes, and then that leads you to see, oh, and actually I still do it now too. And it's kind of horrifying, yeah. But at the same time, it's really relieving because now we can clean it up. Yeah. If we don't see it, we can't clean it.